Now we are recording at the new session. Go ahead, Bob.
Welcome to our presenters on variety selection and update on new varieties. I see Harlene is here, and so is Matt Clark, and Tom Plocher is here. I'm privileged to introduce them. They're all friends of mine, and they've been great assistance to those of us who attempt to grow grapes here in Montana. So let's give you just a brief little bit of introduction. I'm going to share my pictures here. Here's Harlene, who has been working with the University, North Dakota State University for at least a dozen years, where she and her peers have been working to produce super hardy grapevines that can reach down to -40 and still survive and still make good wine, have disease resistance and so forth. And Harlene has been a part of our annual meeting 2 or 3 times. I got to know her especially in years of being a member of the North Dakota Grape and Wine Association and serving on their board as well. So welcome, Harlene. It's good to have you back. And look forward to seeing what the germplasm is doing in North Dakota. Matt Clark is from the University of Minnesota, in charge of the breeding program there. And he is, as far as I understand, the primary breeder who brought out Itasca. Matt, we pruned Itasca yesterday, and it was the healthiest, best looking vines we had. This year in particular outdid all of the Frontenacs and the Marquette. It just looks like a really good solid vine for us, and we like the wine as well. Matt has stopped at our place once or twice to do some wine tasting to see what University of Minnesota wines are like grown in Montana. So welcome back to Montana. Tom Plocher, I don't remember how Tom and I met. It was probably in North Dakota. It might have been at a cold climate conference a long time ago. We have had 1, 2, 3, at least 3 of Tom's cultivars growing here. You might all know him from Petite Pearl and Crimson Pearl, and more recently Verona. The Crimson Pearl does the best of those 3 for us, and we're really, really glad that we've got someone like Tom who is trying to make things at least as hardy as the University of Minnesota's grapes. Tom has an interesting history as I think a scientist with Honeywell, if I remember right, and has also been to China several times to try to help the wine industry in China. So welcome to all 3 of you. We look forward to any kind of wisdom you can pass on to us. And we are especially grateful for you because, as I said in the introduction this afternoon, the grape industry, with what we can grow in the Dakotas and Montana, Wyoming, Minnesota, Wisconsin, is so new compared to vinifera that if it hadn't been for people like you, we wouldn't have wineries here at all. So thank you. And I don't know how this session is running, whether you're taken off in the order that are listed or whether you've got something together. So one of you, take it away.
Okay, I'll go ahead and try the share feature here for the first time. Okay.
We're here to help.
Okay. I think I will just share the file. All right. And let me get this on there. Oh, okay. And my picture's still up. All right.
Looks great.
Okay, looks good. So when Zach invited me to participate today, he sort of asked me if I would focus on grapes that ripen early, and so that's what I've tried to do here. It actually gave me some reason to think about that problem a little bit more, and for a number of reasons. I know in Western Montana, it's important because you're a little bit short on heat to ripen my varieties, for example. And also, as I've talked to producers in the Midwest and the Northeast and in the Mid-South, early ripening is surprisingly mentioned a lot by them. And it's not that they don't have the heat, to ripen grapes. They just would prefer to have earlier ripening varieties so they could harvest the grapes earlier in September and avoid a lot of the later season problems. Okay. So I'm going to try to advance this here. Is it that one? No, nope, not that one.
Use the arrow, Tom, use the arrow at the bottom of your screen to advance.
I don't see an arrow at the bottom of the screen here.
Bottom left corner of your screen.
Wow.
You can also use your arrow pointers on your keyboard.
Yeah.
Okay. Those aren't working either. That's really weird. Okay. How am I going to do this?
Hey, Tom, the arrows are in your picture. They're really
Yeah.
hidden.
Oh, but
Lower left corner.
it's interesting that if you can see them, because I can't see them
Oh,
on my screen here. Well, let me just let me just do an escape here. See if that gets me out of this. Okay. Ask me to sign more. Annotate. Annotate. Can I advance? Sign. Boy, oh boy, this is very odd. There are no arrows here. Maybe let me just stop sharing and see what happens here. Okay, and I can go back to this. I can advance it. Okay, and can you see that now?
You'll have to reshare.
I have to reshare. Okay. Okay. I get back here. Share again. Okay. Okay. So, what I might just do is leave it in this mode. Can everyone read that clearly enough? The problem I have is when I put it into slideshow, the arrows don't show up. I'm pretty sure I can advance it this way. Yeah, I think, yeah, I can advance it this way. I'll just leave it like this. Okay. So as I was saying, as I've talked to people really in climates like Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa, and even places where they get 3,000 degree days a year, Nebraska and Ohio, places like that. Kind of one of the themes is, September is trending wetter and cooler than it has in the past. All is part of what's going on with climate change. Minnesota is experiencing more heavy rainfalls and also about 30% more rainfall, total rainfall. And unfortunately, a lot of this we're finding is coming in September. And I think that's a pretty common experience. So I sort of all the things that I could avoid if my grapes would just ripen the first week in September, it's a pretty long list. The September rain and cold is at the top of the list. And the problems that gives, of course, are low Brix and splitting, which gives rise to all kinds of bad things. Migrating birds, there are some migrating birds coming through in early September, but they really get going by the middle of the month and right through the month of September. And they are so creative in finding new ways to hang onto the netting and eat berries through. So that's something I would like to avoid. turkeys have finally found my vineyard after all these years, and they like to work, as long as there are ripe berries to eat. And then we still have this problem with Asian lady beetles leaving the soybean fields when the soybeans dry up and migrating into the vineyards. And that usually happens the end of September. So that also affects late ripening varieties. So there are lots of reasons for looking at grapes that are earlier ripening. So I thought it might be an interesting exercise to just put out a timeline here for from the earliest ripening of my selections to the latest, and laid out on a timeline of degree days. And of course, the latest one is Verona. That's kind of a benchmark. Verona needs about 2,700 degree days. We don't get that every year here, even by the middle of October. When we do get it, it's usually October 14th or 15th. Petit Pearl likes about 2,600 degree days to get it really, really ripe, to get those nice complex flavors and the structure and the tannin going. That doesn't mean you can't make good wine from it. It doesn't mean you can't make good wine from it if the grapes are less ripe. And certainly there are a lot of people who are showing that. Carlos Creek up in Alexandria, has been making really great Petit Pearl for many years. Steve Johnson in Door County, Wisconsin, the same. And they're just varying up the yeast and their maceration approach and making a different style of wine with it. Crimson's about a week earlier than Petite. And then a couple numbered ones you have out there, TP 1112 and 2351. They're kind of benchmarked right in the middle of the month, and probably a week or so, week and a half earlier than Crimson Pearl. I also put a couple of very new selections there, 4338 and 4348. They kind of cluster right in there with the older numbered ones. But the ones in blue are the ones that I think are really different in terms of early ripening. And those are the ones I thought it would be worth just talking a little bit more about. This is one of my favorite new grapes that came from a 2013 cross, and was very precocious. It had a crop of fruit on it, enough to make a wine sample in its third year as a seedling, which almost never happens here for me. And right away caught my attention just because of the great numbers it has. Just year after year after year, it has these great numbers. 2019 is an interesting year to look at because that was an extremely cold month of September here, cold and wet. So I harvested this at a little over 2,100 degree days, and the numbers weren't perfect, but the numbers are still pretty good, and good enough to make pretty decent wine from it. I think kind of a typical year is probably this past year in 2020, when by the 7th of September, thanks to the warm summer, we already had almost 2,400 degree days accumulated. And the grapes that came in off of this one were really beautiful. I put the tasting notes from the several tastings combined at the bottom here under wine. So this is a fruity one. You can kind of think of it as a fruity version of Petit Pearl, because it has the full body and the big structure, but it also has a lot more fruit than Petit Pearl, and really noticeable. It has huge glycerin legs, so you can swirl your glass, and the glycerin forms a ring on the edge, and it does not run down. It sticks up there. So it has a pretty lush mouthfeel to it. I like the wine a lot. Oh, and the winter hardiness is pretty good. It's actually better than Petit Pearl. It had a 50% crop after the January polar vortex in 2019. And I just pruned it the other day, and it had very little injury from this February cold snap that we had. So on to the next one here. I'm going to talk about 4463 first. That's a sister to 4440, and that's one that that it's a little bit of a not so handsome vine. So it's just not, it just sat in the row, not very notable for a few years before I actually started paying attention to it and realized how early the grapes are ripening on it. And so that was 2018. Um, uh, and Again, you look at the numbers, they're, really super good numbers for winemaking. I think in 2018 was another wet September here for me. And you can see what it did. The Brix is down and it kind of blew out the pH almost up to where it was unstable. 2020 was a different story. I think that those numbers are probably pretty typical of what you'd like to get on it. The wine from this past harvest was pretty good. It's a little lighter in color than say Petite Pearl or 4440, but really complex. I used D21 yeast on it, which tends to bring out fruitiness more as sensed as dried fruit. And it really did the job on this. Really complex nose, kind of plus tannin in the mouth, and very soft and balanced. The 416 has been a B416 has been a sleeper. I have a block of seedlings, about 30 miles west of Minneapolis, at a friend's house. They've been there since 2012. And so I don't get out there very often. And so things happen that I don't notice. And one of the things that happened was that I would go out there middle or end of September, and this thing would not have any fruit left on it to do anything with. So I finally just made some plants and brought it over here to Hugo, my home vineyard. And since then, I've since those vines grew, I had a chance to make some wine. And it ripens in literally in a little over 2100 degree days with pretty good Brix. It's a little more acid than the other two, but it must be all malic acid because you put it through mallow and the wine ends up soft and balanced. So the wine's kind of simple, but it might be an interesting thing to try out there in Western Montana just because of that early ripening. And then I just had one more thing. I just wanted to mention we had planned to have a Vinonord in Burlington this coming December, and because of COVID, we tabled it for a whole year. So it's now been rescheduled for December of 2022. So you might want to just make a note of that. It's a really interesting and fun international conference, very oriented around producers and growers and winemakers, and always a good conference, and very centered on cold climate viticulture. So I can take some questions, or unless, Zach, how do you want to do questions? You want to hold them all to the end, or should we do a few?
We've got a little bit of time while we transition to Harlene. So if you want to stop sharing.
Okay, I will stop sharing. All right.
And I can read you the questions there in the chat. Amaya was asking, is there any correlation with earlier ripening and earlier bud break in the spring?
Not on the 4463 and the 4440. On the other one, the B416 does break bud a little bit earlier. The other two are pretty much with Petite Pearl around that. So they truly have a shorter vegetative period.
And then
16 isn't I mean, it isn't as early to break bud as Marquette or anything like that. It's kind of in between.
And Sam Bergman from out in Billings was asking what your plans are for releasing some of those your numbered lines.
Oh my gosh, those are really new. 4440 is in a mother block out at Northeastern Vine Supply, but I mean we just started that last year. the other two, I just sent out for second testing trials. They just sent cuttings out last week, so they're kind of a long way off.
So 3 to 5 years is what's the ballpark?
Oh, probably 5 years. It
Yeah.
probably is at a minimum. It's probably 5 years with all the stuff that has to be done.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if people appreciate how much you have to do to get them registered, patented, and then grow enough to sell. It is a mountain of work, and we're all glad that you're doing it. And I'm sure Harlene can talk to you about that, because I know they've been working on that with some of the North Dakota varieties.
Yeah.
Harlene, are you ready to go?
I think so. Let's see. I'm going to, okay, where is, okay, how come it is not showing my, for some reason I cannot, I went and hit share content and I do not see my PowerPoint. Well, maybe I just go to share screen one. I only have one screen, and then I go here. Can you see that?
We can.
Good. And okay. So Andres went and probably helped more than what he needed to do on getting this presentation put together. But you know, the whole breeding program and project, or I guess we weren't even able to say breeding, we were supposed to just call it the Grape Germplasm Enhancement Program, you know, really has been a group effort, and there's a lot of people on the bottom that have all helped with this. And this is just showing some of the sensory evaluation. So North Dakota, it's definitely the survival of the fittest. And we realize that every winter could be the last for a grapevine. And this is just showing some of the carnage that occurred from our 2019 minus 35 degrees for 3 days in a row in end of January, beginning of February. Really took the variety trial to the ground pretty much, including, you know, probably the only one that really survived well in the variety trial was Valiant, unfortunately. And so at that time, well, actually, even before that, we had something similar happen in 2010 that decimated everything. And that was probably where we really decided we needed to do something. There's one thing about cold hardy, and then there's North Dakota cold hardy. And so we needed to improve the cold hardiness, be that whether it's winter acclimation, early ripening, as Tom's been talking about, keeping our acids low, which is very difficult when you're working with a Riparia-based system, something that has good wine potential. Unfortunately, our yields, you know, everyone loves Marquette. I love Marquette, but we'd be lucky if we get 250 pounds on average for like I think that was over an 8-year average, about 250 pounds to 300 pounds per acre, which isn't going to really do much. So our first replicated trials of advanced selection started in 2016. And those are now our oldest plots and approaching maturity. And we've put in some additional ones after that. And last year, we added some more. And then this year, we keep on adding. And that's just, how we do that is by using some microvinification, as well as looking at the viticulture side of it and fruit characteristics. So some of our selections, you can see a lot of similarities to, well, that just kind of reminds me of a red prairie star, that middle cluster, but you can see how the clusters tend to be quite tight, smaller berries, although we have been able to get some variation in there and get some larger berries. As far as our experimentals that are in our advanced selections, you can see here where we are as far as the bricks, pH, and those various characteristics, as well as nice size cluster. Some of the basically aromas that are coming from this, that could also, with this one, taste, also get a lot of grapefruit in this one, but a lot of times your nose can go and pick up a lot more senses than a person's taste. Another one that has been tested for a while is this one, a red, as you can see. And Andres has done a lot of testing as far as with ways of preparing wine. He thinks this is a good candidate for carbonic maceration. Here is another red that we have available. And you can see they've all been, if we had something late season, we probably wouldn't even keep it because it will never ripen in time. We would have more problems with a hard freeze coming through before things are ripened. Here is a white that has much larger berries on it, big clusters, big berries. Zach, I think you've been testing this for a couple of years now, or on year 2? This one I really, okay, yep. This one I really like. It is so, it would make just an excellent rosé. In general, had really low TAs, was very smooth, but we're now trying to get larger clusters because small berries and rather small to medium clusters. So if we can get a larger cluster on this one, it's going to really turn out great. You can see some of them where we're really questioning. I think Bob has seen also with some of the reds where, initially they've started out rather small clusters, and as the vine matures, the clusters are getting bigger. That kind of throws a little damper on trying to figure out what's what, because you're really trying to go through and find that, needle in the haystack. And if you aren't sure, if you have this much variation occurring with time, it just means you got to carry that many more vines trying to find that needle. So we've really been working at sticking a lot of plants in the ground and trying to get a number of replicated trials so that we can really make some selections and try to see what we can get. But one thing I really like what Andres has been doing as part of his dissertation research is he's taken, he's bred in this very marginated leaf from a another cultivar, and he's been able to go and integrate this into a number of our grapes that we have at NDSU. And so the thought with that is, okay, if you have this the cineate leaf that leaves a lot more light through, maybe you can have more fruitful buds. Maybe you have things dry quicker, thus, and you have better airflow through. So you can reduce, hopefully, some of your fungicide applications. Maybe also with this much lobing in your leaves, maybe you don't need to do all of that hedging and pruning during the season, because the clusters will receive a lot more light through it as well. We've also gone and done a number of growth chamber studies where we're really trying to squash that season into a much shorter period of time, kind of fooling the grapes into thinking a whole season went through in, you know, a half a year or something. We've done something similar with our breeding, in which we have a number of non-hardy grapes in, as well as hardy grapes in the greenhouse, and we're able then to manipulate them into thinking that, oh, even though they've never, you know, they're in the ground, they never go through a winter, we have been able to go and manipulate them so that they think they've gone through a winter or a dormant phase, and then will go and actually flower. So we've been able to really hasten things a lot. And John Stenger was really responsible for that. Some other work that has just really started this last year is we've taken a population and we're really trying to figure out, you know, this whole winter dormancy acclimation. And so what we've looked here is we're looking at a bunch of phenology differences. And so that what you see there is LAT means lateral numbers. MN was mature node number. Then you have that ratio. PIN was, oh, what was that? Oh, that's the tip. No, TIP was tip. And TN was total node number. So we're taking all these various measurements from those, from plants that a grad student is constantly taking phenology notes. And we're trying to go and look at the QTLs for these to see if we can go and figure out if there's an easy way of identifying cold hardiness and that whole acclimation. And as you can see here, across all these different environments, we had a lot of expression, and it's different across all those environments, which reinforces probably what everyone already knows, is that winter hardiness and the whole dormancy isn't a single gene. It's not going to be easy. There's a whole bunch of things working together for that. Likewise, when you look at this graph, we have those same characteristics and ratios that kind of explain, you know, acclimation and dormancy. This time we're looking at all the different various chromosomes. And again, we see that they're all expressed. And so we can't just say, oh, you know, this area on chromosome 10 is responsible for our acclimation. Now, if we could have, if it would have been, and if life could be that simple, you know, we could have been able to take that, and we could have made a cold hardy from like a Frontenac into a Cabernet, and been able to have the fruit quality and the cold hardiness. So what this means is, you know, life isn't simple, and there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to go and try to get this accomplished. But we got a number of trials set up to start to look at this and try to sift through some of this. Yes, so we do have that need for speed. And as I mentioned, we have those abilities to go and reduce the time it takes for our generations, which gives us a lot more seedlings to be able to put out in the field. And if we could only figure out a way to shorten that period from when we're in the field to when we start to evaluate, it would be wonderful. We don't have the luxury of Cal Davis, where they can go and put all the fertilizer they want into these seedlings, and because they don't have to worry about winter. And so we have to worry about winter and the manipulation of making something less hardy than it really is. So we have to kind of do a wait and see, and also try to keep the rabbits from chewing up everything. And basically, we still need to put it into the field. So in 2018, 2019, and again, 2019 and 2020, this is what we saw in our variety trial. We had, a lot of damage, and 3/4 of our Frontenac died, and so that was what we thought was our hardiest, really grape that had good wine potential. And so we really had to redefine what cold hardiness is for our climate. And so what we did was we started to take notes on this, and we've been collecting these buds from all of these vines, looking at primary and secondary bud damage. And so I'm going to kind of set up this graph a little bit. So when you see blue leaves, that means good. And you're starting at the bottom with how close this branch is to the stem. So you can see that as we go further from the stem, generally we see that things are getting less and less. We have more damage to on our primary and secondary buds. The primary bud is the larger one, the secondary one is the smaller one. So what we've seen is that as a visual clue also, that Valiant seems to be our hardiest grape we have. But what I thought was really, really surprising is you see Baltica, Bluebell, and John Viola having, those would be our next hardiest ones, showing that we did have, probably 50% bud, primary bud, more secondary bud survival. But again, with these grapes, secondary buds are fruitful. It's not like you don't get anything, you do get something. But what is interesting is that, Bluebell and John Viola both have a lot of labrusca in them, which one wouldn't have thought would have given you the exact cold hardiness. So you can see some of these others, and where, we just are not having good success for primary bud survival, let alone secondary bud survival. So with that, we tried to delve deeper into what's going on with Riparia and what can we actually get. And this was a visiting scientist from Turkey, Bülent Kosa, that went and worked on this project, and yes, collecting buds in the middle of the winter. And you can see these high wires are probably at about 6 foot, so you can see how much snow that we had in this area. Anyway, so here's the biotype, these DTAs. And what this says is, so I'll try to set this up. Our maximum temperatures over this period of time, you can see from October through April, so our winter, for each of those sets. And so our maximum temperature, and this is in Celsius, then you can see our minimum temperature. This is the primary buds where half of them are alive, that temperature, and half dead. You can then see it for the phloem and the xylem. And, you know, the numbers like 933, B14, these are all various riparia that we've collected from primarily North Dakota, but some from Montana and a few from Minnesota as well. But what I think is really interesting is that you see the, you know, like GP or B27, you can see how it really started rather low and didn't respond that quickly. Even more, this GPS number 8, very low, not quick to come out as far as the xylem with those temperatures. And so understanding how some of these riparia respond will give us a better idea of what traits can be transferred with these crosses. And so we're starting to try to really understand that aspect and try to, you know, find some good parents to try to introduce some of this really cold hardiness that North Dakota needs. So one last project, and I know I'm probably over time, so I'm going to try to hurry, is this is what Venkat, and this is Venkat and Andres collecting the leaves, and we're working on a genetic map development with doing all the phenology on, he has 1,000 grapes where he is trying to associate the various traits with, and that acclimation, deacclimation, bud break. I guess I should go on. And I don't know if they are having a handout, but anyway, so he's trying to finish this up. He's really, the next step will be doing a GWA on this population that he has. And he's been out, yeah, all year. He's been collecting the phenology, various characteristics on these grapes, 1,000 grapes from select crosses of this population that we have. And so going from, you know, dormancy, bud break, beginning of flowering, fertilization, veraison, and then harvest, and then back to that acclimation or that dormancy, and really trying to go and, you know, understand the grape clock, the grapevine's clock, and how genetically we can understand what we need to focus on. And so this is the population that we put in just this last year, and we keep on going. And what we did here, you can see in the background, we tore out a bunch. Those are primarily from 2010, 2011, and 2000, yeah, those were the ones that, you know, we finally said that was enough. We went and said, keep moving them through, looking for that needle in the haystack. And so really the team has been for the last year, Andres, Boulant, Venkat, Sarah, who is also looking at cold hardiness and doing every other week she's collecting buds. So with that, I want to thank you, and now I have to figure out how to unshare. Here I go. Um, okay, no. Oh, big sign, sorry. There. So lots going on. Where we are with some of those as far as those lines on release, we're getting closer. I feel like that may be a broken record saying, anytime soon. But we're collecting some data for patenting purposes and like that. I was told I can't really say when. And so with that, if there's, well, let's see, questions. Okay.
Harlene, I think we'll save the questions to the end again,
Perfect.
so we give Matt enough time. But
Thank you.
and Matt's putting his stuff up right now. But if you have questions for any of the speakers, Tom, Matt, or Harlene, please just type them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So take it away, Matt. Thanks again for joining us.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. It's always exciting to get to hear what other folks are doing, other breeding programs. And even though Tom's only about 20 miles away from where I work most of the time, our paths almost never cross. As you know, I'm from the University of Minnesota, and I lead the Grape breeding project, where I've been in charge of that program since 2015. So just coming up on 6 years. And in that time, we've made a few advancements that I'm proud of, and we've made a lot of efforts in research, which I'm not going to talk about today. I've just decided to focus on a few potential cultivars. I did start with Itasca because I believe I actually presented when you guys hosted this meeting in Kalispell a few years ago. I came and we were just on the cusp of releasing Itasca. And since then, this variety has been planted all across the country. I think the number that I heard most recently is about 120,000 vines have been planted. And in vintage 2019, we were really starting to see some of our first wines. And in Minnesota, that was maybe 8 wineries, I think. And I know of maybe 13 that were producing wines, and they weren't producing a lot. And those wines were sold out at most places. So in fact, I haven't tasted more than 2 of them to see what folks are doing. We're excited about this variety. Glad to know that it's still growing okay for you, Bob, in Montana. It's a bit aggressive. It's a bit precocious. We're seeing quite a bit of variation in terms of when it produces fruit, especially on younger vines. Seems to do that pretty early in the season. So we're interested to hear how folks are doing with this vine, and especially in different states. In Ohio, not doing as hot. It ripens too early, but I think that's just because they've got some juvenile vines, and hopefully as those vines mature, they perform a little bit better there. But it's in my opinion, a beautiful looking grape, disease resistant, which doesn't mean no spray, but it's something that we think even some organic growers should be able to do something with. So this is the mother vine, the original vine for our Itasca. You can see it's pretty big and robust, has these big leaves. They've got a bit of leaf curling to them. This is not viral. This is just what they look like, kind of turn on the edges. And so some folks, if you're growing it, don't panic. It's likely not virus. It's just the way it looks. We see it in the greenhouse, we see it in the field, and it's always done that. So vine spacing is something that I think people should be exploring, and cropping, as we've heard about with Amaya. She doesn't have any data. I don't think she reported any data today on how Itasca is doing, but looking forward to that. Having some real viticulturalists tell us how it performs. So some key other aspects about Itasca that might be of interest to you is that it's a cross between Frontenac Gris and Minnesota 1, 2, 3, 4. I bring this up for a couple of reasons. When we look at the complete pedigree for this variety, it goes back many, many generations through VR Blanc and V Blanc and the Sable breeding lines another 6 or 7 generations. But in Minnesota, on this chart, you can see Riparia 39 is one of the ancestors, but there's also another Riparia ancestor 89. And those two, I think, are contributing together to the extreme cold hardiness that we see with this variety compared to either of its parents. It seems to outperform it, at least for primary bud injury. So Harlene mentioned, cold hardiness isn't just a single gene. And in the case of our program, when we're able to bring together a couple of different Vitis riparias through our pedigrees, it seems to pay off, and we are maybe getting a bit more cold hardiness. I wish I had a way to measure that and test that hypothesis, but I don't have one at the moment. The reason that Itasca was released and not some of the other varieties that we were looking at the time was because of its bud survival. And this table is just showing you some average data for fruit chemistry, but also bud survival way at the far right. And these data, I believe, are from 2014, which was one of our polar vortices. And you can see that it really outperformed Frontenac, having twice as many primary buds surviving after that winter. And this set it apart from other varieties, one that I'll talk about in a minute, that were in our pipeline. And so it lived, and so it came out of the program and we decided to release it. The other key feature about it is its titratable acidity. Here I'm showing an average of about 10 grams, almost 11 grams per liter of acidity. We do see that even a bit lower in the juice, sometimes as low as 8. And we're seeing other folks having similar values across the region. So this, as you can see, is about 30% lower than Frontenac. It's even lower than Marquette. And the finished wine ends up coming in that 6 to 7 range. So much better wine product than some of these others that are higher in acid. So our breeding program, just going to that next generation away from Frontenac, has reduced the acidity. And then if we looked at Frontenac's parents, its Vitis riparia donor, its acidity is even much higher, I think somewhere between 19 and 20 grams per liter. So we're making incremental changes, and it takes time. So Frontenac, the cross that produced Frontenac was made in the late 1970s, and Frontenac came out in 1996, I believe. The cross that produced Itasca was several years later and was first identified in our vineyard in 2009 and not released until 2017. So the timeline is slow to get varieties out, but that all being said, we're very hopeful for Itasca and what it can do, whether on its own as a wine or with that lower acidity used in blending. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a few varieties that are in the pipeline. Minnesota 1220 has been in that pipeline for quite some time, and it wasn't released because it's not quite as cold hardy as what our growers are expecting in Minnesota. We are able to produce a pretty nice crop at our research vineyard. This variety does get powdery mildew. You can see some of that on the leaves. These fruit actually look pretty good. It makes excellent wine. It's a relatively easy grape to grow. It's not as vigorous grower as Itasca is. And this variety was part of the NE 1020 multi-state variety trial. So these grapes went out to a number of growers across the region. And because of that, we've gotten a lot of data. So it's been tested in Wisconsin, it's been tested at Iowa State, Ohio State, and so forth. And their data in these other places where it's a bit warmer, more like a zone 5 than a zone 4, those vines produce pretty well. So we've decided to move forward with releasing this variety. In the process of doing the patent application and picking a name and so forth, getting the plants to nurseries and so on. I can tell you that this variety is a cross between Valentin Blotner selection called 86-4 and Frontenac. So again, Frontenac playing a critical role here. Its juice chemistry is great, even better than Itasca, which I think is what people really like about it. It makes a really nice wine. Everything about it kind of comes in nice, except for that cold hardiness. That's a problem. And you'd have to manage this like the other varieties in so much that it does get powdery mildew. You can see it a bit on the rachis here and also on some of those canes. So that's something that we can't promise that it's certainly not disease resistant. So look forward to this. It's already gone through the Clean Plant Center, Northwest and Prosser, which means that we have vines that are certified virus-free. And we're in the process of identifying nurseries who are interested in producing and marketing this variety for us. And I don't have an official release date. I would think that within the next year, we can hopefully make some announcements about what the name is going to be and where it will be available. I'll show you the pedigree because I think it's interesting. It's quite similar to a lot of stuff in our breeding program. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but a lot of our plant material finds its way back to Seyval Blanc, which was one of those French-American hybrids. It's excellent wine quality. It's not cold hardy, but it seems to be providing, not in this case, powdery mildew resistance, phylloxera resistance, and some other interesting traits into our breeding program. Unfortunately, like I said, 1220 didn't get that powdery mildew resistance. Another one that's on our short list is Minnesota 1280. This variety is an offspring of 1220 and La Crescent. Again, it's gone out for testing. It's similar to both 1220 and La Crescent, and now I'm blanking on what its flavor profile is, if it has those muscat aromatics like La Crescent does. But looking at the fruit, you can see it looks a lot like La Crescent. You get this underripe green look to those fruit that aren't exposed to the sunshine. It's just not as vigorous of a grower as La Crescent, which is, I guess, one favorable attribute. So this one is a little bit further down the pipeline of whether or not we're going to release it. We're interested in it. I know that it's gotten better reviews at with colleagues down at Purdue and Ohio State, where it seems to be doing better than Itasca. So this one might be better set for places other than the north. I think a lot of folks in our industry are looking for a new red wine, and I'm always glad to hear what Tom is doing, because he seems to focus a lot in that space and present, and his varieties are excellent examples of that. This is a kind of a unique example, Minnesota 1394. This is a cross of 1247 and Frontenac. 1247 is unique. It's a cross of another interesting hybrid that has Merlot in its background and Vitis amurensis. So for our program, we don't have a lot of Vitis amurensis in our breeding materials, and so this is just kind of interesting and unique, especially because it brings in some of these Vitis vinifera characteristics from the Merlot as well. So the acids are in the right place with juice TAs under 10, which is my breeding target, around 7, which is quite great. And the other chemistry is good. Clusters are okay. They're a little spindly. These pictures aren't great. But this is more or less what they look like. We're pretty excited about this. That 1247, we've used a lot in breeding, and we keep identifying more and more more and more seedlings that have those higher quality attributes. So, and appears to be relatively cold hardy. The other thing that we've been doing on our breeding program is focusing on table grapes. I've been fortunate to have a graduate student who came from the table grape industry in Brazil, and she convinced me that we should focus on table grape breeding, and we've been fortunate to get a few grants to do that. And so we've moved to doing embryo rescue. And that's a specialized technique where we go in and extract the developing seed before it gets aborted by the mother plant, grow it in a test tube, grow out the ovule or the developing seed in a test tube, and then extract the embryo from that a couple months later. And it's hard to see, but it's that little white dot inside that yellow circle on the left-hand side. We pull those out in about I don't know, the first week of November, I would say. And then they germinate just like a normal seedling does. In about 10 days, they start to grow. And then right now, if you were to walk into our greenhouse, we've got a couple hundred plants that are about 12 to 14 inches tall and growing like normal plants. And our hope is, if we've done this right, the seedlings that we've grown out will carry the genes for seedlessness as well. And we plan to run DNA tests on those. So we had in our breeding program a few potential table grape cultivars, and we've been using those as parents because they're relatively cold hardy and have some really interesting traits, especially good flavor. This is one called MN 1296. It's a cross between Louise Swenson and then one of our breeding lines called 1213. It's a pink fruited variety. It's a lot like Somerset Seedless. I think it's probably a bit more cold hardy, though I don't have the data on that. The berries are a little bit bigger and the clusters are a little bit bigger. And we've been growing this on high wire cordon, and I'm wanting to test it in VSP. Primarily because these clusters are really tight to that wire and the canopy is really, really dense. And so we haven't found a solution to get those fruit exposed and to get more, those canes exposed for more fruitful buds. So that's kind of why I asked Amaya the question earlier, what's going on with choosing VSP or high wire. So we're hoping to test that with this variety. I'm optimistic about it. It's a little bit, I think it's different enough from those Swenson varieties that I mentioned that it might be something that we release. 1369 is my favorite as of right now. Unfortunately, our cold hardiness data for bud survival that we collected last week shows that it had winter injury, and that probably happened pretty early in the winter. The buds that we were chopping were black inside. Unfortunately, we don't know the actual parentage, but we've done the genetic test. We just need to analyze the data to hopefully identify what they are. But this is a variety that has excellent flavor. It's very aromatic. It has a long ripening period where I think if you were wanting to grow this to market to schools or at farmers markets, you could produce this grape and pick it several weeks in a row. And just with each increasing week, of course, there's more sugar accumulation, flavors change a little bit, but even early in the season, when it's ripe enough, I think people would taste it and say, wow, this is a really interesting product. The flavors to me are things like strawberry and guava and tropical notes. It's seedless in so much that there's a very small seed trace. It's not really noticeable to me when you're eating it compared to some of the other varieties. And the texture's okay. It's not crispy like the varieties you're getting at the grocery store, but I think that having a local grape with that flavor is something that really stands out. And then 1325 is I think the last slide that I have. This variety is a black seedless grape. The parents, again, 1213 was used several years ago as a parent before I came in, and it's contributing some of that seedlessness. This is a funky variety. It has thick skin, funky in flavor, funky in how it grows. And it has kind of maybe too tight of cluster for most table grape folks, and the berries sort of small. But we've been using this for some different approaches. We've been cooking with it, like in muffins, thinking about putting them into smoothies and treating this grape like it might be a blueberry. So I made some jam with it, and you get some of those Concord Labrusca flavors, but you also get some other floral notes. And so for me, having a thick skinned berry that's not a blueberry, so it doesn't get spotted wing Drosophila, and might be a really neat way for farms to diversify, and you have a grape that has a slightly different purpose than what we normally think about. Another grape maybe for fruit production and home uses. So that's another kind of funky one. I really like it. Hopefully more people get a chance to taste it. And so these last table grapes are certainly in our variety release pipeline and have gone out for testing at universities as well as with some commercial growers here in Minnesota. And then of course, I'm fortunate to have a great big team and lots of funding and support. So we, in addition to variety development, we're also doing genetic studies and a number of other research projects. And of course, I do very little of this work. A lot of it falls on the shoulders of the folks who are mentioned here and the folks who came before them. So I know that we're over time, but I'm happy to, along with the other panelists, answer some questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thanks much, Matt.
Yeah, you're welcome. Oh, it looks like there's maybe a question for me. Are we still focusing on thick-skinned grapes? I don't know if focus is the right word. Splitting is a problem, of course. And spotted wing Drosophila seems to be an issue in our early ripening varieties. And that was a question I was going to have for you, Tom. If you have any issues with your early ripening having thinner skins and being more attractive to those bugs. Oh, Tom, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. And most of my varieties, have fairly thin skins, except for 2351, which has really tough skins. So I haven't really seen any correlation with ripening. But yeah, actually, I have for quite a few years now. I've been working to kind of combine, the good wine qualities of the second generation Petit Pearl selections with the tough skin of the 2351, and so last season I made my first crosses for that, and we'll do more this year because I mean that's the other solution to the wet Septembers is just really tough skins, and that is a big problem everywhere. I think everywhere we're in the wet autumn, part of the U.S.
There was a question in the chat earlier, and maybe all of you could take a swipe at it. If you had a variety in your vineyard that you wasn't working out and wanted to graft something, a newer, maybe earlier ripening variety onto it, do we know how that rootstock is going to affect the characteristics of that grape you graft onto it?
Well, I can mention a U of M study that was done back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. They did a very controlled experiment grafting St. Pepin onto 3 different rootstocks, 3 different really hardy rootstocks, and then and also 3309, which is a conventional vinifera, a rootstock for vinifera's, and they looked at what effect it had on ripening of the fruit, what effect it had on wood ripening, and on hardiness. And what they found was that grafted onto the hardier rootstocks, St. Pepin ripened, I don't know if I remember right, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 days earlier. And there was a little bump in winter hardiness too. That's the only study I can remember, I can think of that actually did that.
Yeah. We also tried a study where, St. Croix isn't quite hardy enough for us. And so we put St. Croix on various Riparia rootstock. And I think, grandkids, for, 5 years, saw nothing but fighting with trying to keep that rootstock under control and not a problem with the St. Croix. Finally, the year that I had given up on this trial and stopped taking data, sure enough, anything that had a St. Croix on its own rootstock died completely down to the ground that winter, and anything with the Riparia was okay. But, you know, there was so much work with it that, you know, and then I stopped taking data because I'd given up on it. So it was after the fact that happened. So to do something like that, it's going to take a lot of work. We also tried to do something similar to advance some of our advanced selections by grafting them onto cordons to see if we could hasten that whole thing, because yeah, everyone's been talking about how long that takes. And it's really hard to go and when you got a mature vine like that, to go and get those grafts to really work. So that's just what we've had from personal experience. When we did the St. Croix study, we were using small, you know, it was small scion and rootstock. We had no problem. When we tried to go on mature vines, we had problems. So my 2 cents, sorry.
Matt, do you have any experience to add?
None. I have nothing else to contribute.
We appreciate your honesty.
I am gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna put in the chat a link to our 2021 bud survival data. We just put this out last week for our growers. It might be of interest to yours about how the varieties survived in Minnesota this winter, at least for primary and secondary buds.
Yeah, and I'll use that as an opportunity to encourage grape growers in Montana to go out and check their bud survival. We had a fairly mild winter, but we're surprised by the number of buds that died, because we went from, in late October, we went from lows in the high 30s to 10 below in a couple days.
I would comment that Harlene and myself and Ann Fennell and Horst Kaspari down at Colorado are all trying to explore better ways of quantifying what cold injury is. We always say winter hardiness, but the reality is we have what happens in the spring, what happens in the fall, and folks, maybe not so much in Minnesota, have these huge temperature swings that are very traumatic for those vines. So we're looking at exploring some grant programs to get a better understanding of how to quantify that and help our growers, and then ultimately, I think, support our breeding programs to respond to that.
Something I've experienced at Tongue River Vineyard is that regardless of species, it seems like younger trunks and cordons are surviving better for us than well-established ones. Something is 3 or 4 years old, might die back, but last year's growth or the year before doesn't seem to die back as readily. I'm wondering if any of you have had any kind of experience in comparing older established wood to younger wood for survival. Sounds like a no.
You know,
I think
most of ours, I was going to say, it's been anecdotal. So it's hard to go and get some really sound data on something like that, because one never knows what kind of winter you're going to have. So you always might leave a kicker, but so if that kicker goes and survives, does that mean that the younger wood was that much better than the older? I don't know.
I was just going to comment too that the older wood seems to accumulate probably more winter injury in addition to trunk diseases. And so those two things have been hard to detangle. And I have a graduate student right now who's working on identifying the trunk diseases that we have across Minnesota. And so we've always, or at least historically, always just said, well, these older vines are accumulating injury in their xylem or phloem. Older vines are having more of that, so have to, deal with that, and that could be contributing to why these older vines are having more dieback and more injury. And now that we've started to explore these diseases, we've identified over 34 different genera, or different species, I should say, that are contributing to wood rots and vine disease, vine decline. And so there's probably a lot of interactions going on with that in addition. So older vines seem to have a lot of problems, including being old, as well as having more injury and more disease.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Matt on that. So one of my selections that I really like for the wine is TP1112, but it seems to be kind of susceptible to these trunk diseases, and so a few years ago, I decided, the best way to grow these to be productive is to minimize the amount of old wood that you have, and minimize the problem of or the difficulty of renewing trunks and cordons. So I started growing them on a low wire, on a VSP type system, with multiple trunks of different ages up to that low wire, and then cane pruning them on the low wire. And in some cases, they have kind of long internodes, so you have to use double canes. But since I've been doing that, I've been really surprised at how tough they are. We had 32 below zero here on the 15th of February this year, and I just pruned these vines and they had no injury. And before, they were just having a lot of injury on these big old trunks and cordons. And so I don't know. I think it's something we need to rethink a little bit. Maybe big old trunks and cordons and top wire cordons are really not the way to go necessarily, because of the disease problem, which sets them up for the winter injury.
I'm glad you said that. I don't know if Amaya's still here, but I'd love to have her opinion, or have her folks do that research to answer that question, because
They can do that.
she's got the hands and the space to do it. I think everyone thinks that big old vines are kind of sexy, romantic, nice big cordons, but the reality is they accumulate disease. They're probably less fruitful. They're more prone to injury. So why not think about renewing more often, as opposed to having that decline? And maybe you could have more productive years out of those vines.
Yep.
I will go and say though that, when we had all that dieback, so we had all new canes coming out of those vines, and we thought last 2 winters ago was really a mild winter, but we again had lots of dieback. And the thought is that with those vines being so young, that they may have tried to keep on growing too late in the fall, and that with the rapid change that we can have from one day to the next, that we got hit hard with the not being acclimated when we got some of those really cold temperatures.
So thanks again, Tom, Harlene, and Matt. Great session. We're always excited to hear about what's in the pipeline, and always appreciative of all the work you guys do to keep pushing that forward. If you can take a moment to fill out the poll that I've posted. And the next session is just a social session. Speakers, if you can stay on for a little bit, and open a bottle of wine, as Bob's indicating. We're just gonna put you into some different breakout rooms, and you'll be able to mingle. You'll have 3 to 4 people in each room, so you'll be able to chat very freely and openly. And then we will, after 15 minutes or so, we will rearrange you, and you can talk to some other folks that are in the conference. So remember to join us again tomorrow morning for some more great speakers. And then next Friday and Saturday for more talks focusing on winemaking and the business of a winery.